Sarah Whitfield still remembers the smell of her own kitchen the morning everything changed. Coffee. Toast. The faint trace of lavender cleaning spray that had become as familiar to her home as her husband's laugh. She remembers thinking that morning was ordinary, that her marriage was safe, that the woman scrubbing her countertops 3 times a week was simply there to make her life easier. She did not know that within a matter of months, that same woman would be standing in the center of her living room holding a truth that would tear her family into pieces she is still trying to put back together today. This is the story of David Whitfield, his wife Sarah, their 6-year-old daughter Emma, and the housekeeper named Vanessa Cole, who was never supposed to become the most important person in any of their lives. What happened inside that house in a quiet Ohio suburb would leave neighbors stunned, a marriage destroyed, and a little girl caught in the middle of a betrayal her parents never saw coming. Before we go any further, there are 3 questions you need to carry with you through this entire story. Why did a woman hired to clean floors and fold laundry end up rearranging an entire family's future? What did Vanessa Cole actually want when she walked through the Whitfields' front door for the first time? And when the truth finally surfaced, why did the person most devastated by it insist, for weeks, that she already knew? These are not simple questions, and the answers will not come easily. Some of what you are about to hear will make you angry. Some of it will make you question people you thought you understood. By the end, you may find yourself asking whether you would have noticed the warning signs sooner than Sarah Whitfield did, or whether, like her, you would have been too close to the situation to see it clearly at all. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. David and Sarah Whitfield met the way a lot of couples in their generation did, through mutual friends at a backyard barbecue in the summer of 2014. David was working long hours at a regional logistics company, steadily climbing toward a management position he had wanted for years. Sarah was finishing her nursing degree, exhausted but determined, the kind of woman who kept a color-coded planner and never missed a deadline in her life. Friends who knew them back then describe a couple that balanced each other out, David's easygoing humor softening Sarah's intensity, Sarah's discipline giving David a sense of direction he had been missing. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony surrounded by family, and by 2018 they welcomed their daughter Emma into the world. On paper, and in nearly every photograph from those years, they looked like the kind of family other people quietly envied. By early 2023, the Whitfields' life had settled into a rhythm that most working parents would recognize immediately. David's promotion had come through, which meant more money but also more travel, sometimes 3 or 4 nights away every other week. Sarah had returned to full-time hospital shifts after Emma started school, and between the two of them, the house had become harder and harder to keep up with. Laundry piled up. Meals became rushed. Sarah began floating the idea of hiring help, not because they couldn't manage, she was quick to tell friends, but because she was tired of feeling like she was failing at everything at once. David agreed almost immediately. He wanted his wife to have some room to breathe. Neither of them could have predicted what that decision would eventually cost them. The search for a housekeeper took less than 2 weeks. Sarah posted in a local parenting group online, the kind of group mothers use to trade recommendations for pediatricians and babysitters, and within days she had a handful of names to consider. Vanessa Cole stood out immediately. Her references were strong. Her previous employer, an older couple 2 towns over, described her as reliable, warm, and endlessly patient with children. Sarah remembers the interview well, how Vanessa arrived early, how she asked thoughtful questions about Emma's routines and allergies, how she seemed genuinely interested in becoming part of the household rather than simply clocking hours. Sarah hired her on the spot. David met her briefly that first week and later told a friend that hiring her was, in his words, the best decision they had made all year. For the first several months, everything about the arrangement seemed to work exactly as intended. Vanessa came 3 afternoons a week, cleaning, organizing, occasionally picking Emma up from school when Sarah's hospital shifts ran long. Emma adored her almost instantly, the way children often attach themselves to any adult who gives them full attention. Sarah found herself Grateful in ways she hadn't expected, coming home to a house that felt manageable again, dinners that were half prepared, a daughter who was fed, bathed, and calm by the time she walked through the door. Friends who visited during that period remember commenting on how relaxed Sarah seemed compared to the year before. What none of them noticed, what Sarah herself did not notice until it was far too late, was how naturally Vanessa had begun inserting herself into moments that had nothing to do with cleaning at all. It started with small things, the kind of things that feel harmless in isolation. Vanessa began texting David directly about Emma's school schedule instead of routing everything through Sarah. She started staying later than her scheduled hours, staying for dinner some evenings when David was home and Sarah was working a night shift. She learned details about the Whitfields' finances, their arguments, their private frustrations with each other, not because she was prying, but because David, lonely on the nights Sarah worked and Vanessa stayed to help with Emma's bedtime, began talking to her the way he used to talk to his wife. Neighbors who saw her car in the driveway later than usual assumed nothing of it. Why would they? She was, after all, only the housekeeper. By the fall of 2023, something had shifted in the rhythm of the Whitfield household, something subtle enough that Sarah couldn't quite name it, but persistent enough that she began lying awake at night trying to identify what felt different. David seemed distracted during their conversations. He picked up his phone more quickly when it buzzed. He started finding reasons to be home on the afternoons Vanessa was scheduled, even when his work schedule should have kept him at the office. Sarah asked him once, half joking, whether he had a crush on their housekeeper. David laughed it off completely, told her she was being ridiculous, and Sarah, exhausted from back-to-back hospital shifts and trusting her husband completely, let the comment go. She would spend the following year wishing she hadn't. By January of 2024, Sarah Whitfield had learned to talk herself out of every uneasy feeling that crossed her mind. She told herself David was simply stressed from work. She told herself Vanessa Cole was just good at her job, thorough, dependable, maybe a little too involved in the family's day-to-day life, but nothing more than that. She told herself the late nights, the sudden trips to the store that lasted longer than they should have, the way David's phone buzzed and he turned it face down without looking at it in front of her, all of it had a reasonable explanation somewhere. She was a nurse. She was trained to notice small changes in the body that most people would overlook, a slight fever, an irregular heartbeat, a patient who insisted they felt fine when their vitals said otherwise. And yet in her own home, surrounded by the people she loved most, she convinced herself she was imagining things that were not really there. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in February, one Sarah would later describe as the night she stopped being able to lie to herself. She had come home 2 hours early from a shift that had been cancelled at the last minute, planning to surprise David and Emma with takeout from their daughter's favorite Thai restaurant. She remembers pulling into the driveway and noticing Vanessa's car parked exactly where it always was, except it was nearly 7 in the evening, well past the end of her scheduled hours. Sarah assumed there had been a scheduling mix-up, or that Emma needed extra help with homework. She walked through the front door quietly, expecting to call out a greeting, and instead found the house unusually still, the television off, no sound of Emma's laughter anywhere in the downstairs rooms. She found her daughter first, sitting cross-legged in front of an iPad in her bedroom upstairs, headphones on, completely unaware that her mother had come home early. Sarah remembers feeling relieved for a moment, thinking maybe the quiet house simply meant everyone was occupied and calm. It was only when she went looking for David that the evening took a turn she would replay in her mind for months afterward. She found him in the kitchen with Vanessa, standing closer together than any employer and employee had any reason to stand, laughing quietly over something on his phone, the kind of easy, comfortable laughter that Sarah realized, with a sudden and sickening clarity, she had not shared with her own husband in longer than she could remember. Either of them noticed her at first. For nearly 10 full seconds, Sarah stood in the doorway of her own kitchen, watching a version of intimacy between her husband and another woman that she had no name for yet, but understood immediately in her body before her mind could catch up. David noticed her first, and Sarah would later describe the look on his face. Face as one of pure, unmistakable guilt, the kind of expression a person cannot fake or explain away in the moment it happens. Vanessa stepped back almost instantly, straightened her posture, and offered a quick, overly polite goodnight before gathering her things and leaving earlier than Sarah had ever seen her leave before. David tried to explain, told Sarah they were only looking at something funny Vanessa's sister had sent her, that it meant absolutely nothing, that Sarah was reading far too much into an innocent moment after a long day at work. Sarah wanted desperately to believe him. She had built an entire life around believing him. But something in her chest, some instinct she could not silence no matter how hard she tried, told her that the story he was offering her was not the whole truth, and possibly not any part of it at all. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself doing things she never imagined she would do inside her own marriage. She began checking the family calendar more closely, noticing patterns she had somehow missed before. The way David's work trips seemed to align suspiciously often with days Vanessa mentioned needing time off. She started asking Emma small, careful questions about her afternoons with Vanessa, questions a 6-year-old could never fully understand the weight of. Emma, in her innocent way, mentioned that Daddy sometimes came home early on the days Vanessa was there, that the three of them would sometimes get ice cream together as a surprise, that Vanessa had once told her she felt like part of their family now. Every answer Emma gave, offered with the pure honesty only a child is capable of, landed on Sarah like another stone added to a weight she was already struggling to carry. It was a message on David's phone, one he forgot to fully close out of before leaving for work one morning, that finally gave Sarah the confirmation she had spent weeks both dreading and searching for. The conversation between David and Vanessa stretched back months, filled with a familiarity and affection that no working relationship between a husband and his family's housekeeper could reasonably explain. There were plans mentioned for times when Sarah was working overnight shifts. There were comments about how difficult things had become at home, comments David had apparently been making about his own marriage to a woman his wife had hired to fold laundry and pick up their daughter from school. Sarah sat at the kitchen table that morning long after David had left for work, reading messages that rewrote the last year of her life in front of her eyes, and she understood, with a certainty that made her hands shake, that everything she had sensed but talked herself out of had been true the entire time. Sarah confronted David that same evening, the phone still open on the kitchen table between them like evidence in a trial either of them had asked to stand in. He did not deny it for long. Within minutes, the story came apart entirely, admissions replacing excuses, months of quiet betrayal reduced to a handful of sentences spoken across a table where the family used to eat dinner together. Vanessa was let go by the end of that week, though David's contact with her did not end there, and by spring the Whitfields had separated, David moving into an apartment across town while Sarah stayed in the house with Emma. Friends and family rallied around Sarah in the way people do after a betrayal like this, bringing meals, offering spare rooms, telling her repeatedly that she deserved better. For months, Sarah believed she finally understood the full shape of what had happened to her family. It was nearly a year later, at a school fundraiser she almost didn't attend, that Sarah learned the story was larger than she had ever imagined. A mother from 2 streets over, someone Sarah barely knew, mentioned in passing that she had recently hired a wonderful housekeeper, warm, attentive, incredible with her kids, a woman named Vanessa who came highly recommended. Sarah remembers the exact moment her stomach dropped, the polite smile she forced onto her face while the other woman kept talking, describing a pattern of behavior Sarah recognized instantly. A housekeeper who stayed later than scheduled, who had grown remarkably close to the husband in the household, who seemed to know details about the family's private life that no employee should reasonably know. Sarah realized, standing in a school gymnasium surrounded by balloons and fundraiser tables, that her family had not been an isolated tragedy. They had been one stop along a path Vanessa Cole had walked before, and would likely walk again. That single conversation reshaped everything Sarah thought she understood about what had happened to her marriage. This was never simply about attraction, or a lonely husband making a terrible mistake in isolation. It was about a pattern, deliberate or not, that had now repeated itself in at least one other home, with at least one other family who had no idea what they were walking into when they hired extra help around the house. Sarah made the difficult decision to reach out to that mother privately, not to frighten her, but to share what her own family had lived through, quietly hoping that knowledge might change the outcome for someone else the way it had never changed hers. Whether that warning was heeded, whether it mattered at all, remains something Sarah still does not know for certain to this day. 2 years removed from the night she found her husband laughing quietly in the kitchen with the woman she had trusted to help raise her daughter, Sarah Whitfield has rebuilt a version of her life that looks nothing like the one she once imagined. She and David share custody of Emma, their interactions civil but distant, the easy partnership of their early marriage replaced by something more careful and more guarded. Sarah still works as a nurse. She still notices small details other people overlook, though now she trusts that instinct far more than she used to. She has told this story publicly, she says, not for sympathy, but because she believes other families deserve to recognize the warning signs sooner than she did, before trust quietly becomes something else entirely inside their own homes. What happened to the Whitfield family raises a question that reaches far beyond one house in Ohio and one housekeeper named Vanessa Cole. How well do any of us actually know the people we allow closest to our children, our homes, and our most private moments? Sarah's story is not simply about infidelity. It is about how easily trust can be handed to someone before it has been fully earned, and how long it can take to notice when that trust has been quietly misplaced. Would you have caught the warning signs as early as Sarah wishes she had, or would you, like her, have been too close to the situation to see clearly what was happening right in front of you? Let us know in the comments what part of this story affected you the most.